So now you write a lot about, like you said, true crime, which I'm a big fan of. You write a lot about the paranormal, which is covered extensively on this show. But then what made you write a book? I specifically asked you about one book that you came out with last year that I stumbled upon. It's called A Song of Dance and Death, Magic, Murder, Mayhem, and the Diabolical Notes of the Devil's Music. What led you to start writing or be inspired to write a book about the
No.
devil's music?
Honestly, I'm going to take the inspiration back on this particular book all the way back to when I was about 11. So that's been a while.
It's like 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Just yeah, not very long. But so as I think, but actually the title comes from a chapter in a book that I read when I was like 11. It was called the Haunted Houses by a guy named Richard Weiner. And it came out in the late 70s. I picked it up, I read it. And when I read the book, I was like, wow, this guy travels around the country and writes about haunted places. Can you actually do that as a job? Turns out you can, as I found out. But at the time, it just seemed like, well, this is great. So it's always been like one of my big inspirations. Well, there was a chapter in the book about curses and the Grand Old Opry curse. That's where I first heard about it. And I heard about, Billie Holiday and some different things that were, these curses that were linked to music. And I thought that's really cool. One of these days I'm going to have to dig into that more. Yeah,
I
cool.
studied music in college, and so I got to hand it to you. I've read a lot of books about music, a lot of books about the history of music, a lot of books about the mechanics of music, and I knew what a tritone was
Right.
before I read your book. But you really explained it well, and I really like the fact that I earned my iTunes music subscription this month when I was reading your book because there's a lot of music in there that
Yeah, there is.
I
I
didn't know how you were mentioning tunes like you were mentioning you wrote about Gloomy Sunday, the
yeah,
Billie Holiday tune. Well,
yeah,
I didn't know that tune, so I went
yeah.
back and listened to it, and then reading the rich history of that tune and
Yeah.
the sad
Yeah, the
history
sad, tragic history of the
and
song.
how it was
Yeah,
banned for years. I had no idea. So like you just
yeah.
did a great job of researching all this stuff from a musician standpoint. I was like, wow, I'm really learning something here from a
Oh, well,
go.
that's good. I mean, I've had a lot of friends.
I'm learning something from
Yeah,
a ghost book or from a
yeah, right, right, right.
lot,
I
you
mean,
know.
that was the fun thing about it. And like you said with the 27 Club, I mean, everybody knows the big ones.
Right.
They'll know, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Amy Winehouse and Brian Jones. The big ones, but there were so many. That's where it gets weird. I mean, yes, it's a big deal when you think of some of these really famous musicians who died at 27, but when you start digging back and starting with Robert Johnson, but then you start digging back to the early 60s, and I didn't even put everybody in here. I
Yeah.
only included the people that I really thought that people would be able to connect to, because there's even more. I mean, there's even more musicians than what I included in the book, but all of these had a story. They had a story behind them. And so, but then of course, I had to end the chapter with the one story that drives my friends absolutely crazy and wish I would stop talking about, because I've been talking about it for like 30 years, and that's my Jim Morrison story.
Yeah,
So
let's talk about
because
that.
I spend all my time trying to convince people he didn't really die in Paris at the age of 27 in 1971. I think that it's more for me, I think it's more wish fulfillment than actual fact. But there are some weird elements to that story. You have to admit that there are some strange things that did come up. I mean, starting with the fact that he spent a good part of his career. I mean, don't get me wrong, the guy was a complete whack job. I'm not trying to elevate him any higher, but I do love the Doors and I always loved Morrison. But I think part of the attraction is that he was fairly crazy. And for a good part of the time when they became famous, he was talking about just blowing out and disappearing one day. In fact, that was one of the first things he suggested to try to get the band publicity, was to, disappear and fake his death. I mean, that was one of his big ideas that he ran by everybody, which is probably why Ray Manzarek is telling, Bill Sidens, hey man, just make sure you check. Just be sure he's actually in the coffin. And of course, Bill never does. Nobody
No,
sees
nobody did.
Nobody sees him. Pamela, she's the only one they could listen to who would have said anything for Morrison. I mean, she would have lied about anything for him if he told her to. She'd have done it. And Bill shows up. He doesn't see the casket. It turns out later the doctor that signed the death certificate didn't even exist. I mean, there's all this stuff, and they're quickly burying him. They're quickly putting him in the ground, and then he goes home having never seen anything and has to tell the rest of the band, hell, I don't know. I guess everybody said he was dead. I guess he was. But nobody really knows. And I mean, there's all these reports from people who claim they saw him at the airport that day. I mean, again, everybody saw Elvis everywhere from Michigan to Mars after he died. But this was a case of where Jim Morrison really talked about his plans to disappear for years. And so should we even be surprised that he might have? I don't think so.